Welcome back to a transmission oil testing series. That's right. Got some transmission fluids here that I've tested over the years, and I thought I'd compile them together to see which transmission fluid is of the better type. Sort of an apples to oranges thing here, but we're going to compare what they did overall as far as what their additives are and how they work out. And the three that I'm going to test or have tested and actually ran, and these are used samples, are the Coastal Full Synthetic Multi-Vehicle ATF, which I cannot find anymore, so don't know what happened to that, but also the Valvoline Maxlife Mercon LV and the AMSOIL Mercon LV transmission fluid. So we're going to go ahead and start out with the Coastal. Basically, I tested this stuff back in 2016 and had about 27,000 miles on it when I tested it. The product, like I said, is no longer available, and the transmission fluid was suffering a little bit from my edge running a little bit on a high temperature, but that's normal for it. I've since discovered it just the way it is in the summer. It runs about 210, 214 degrees, and it's got 270,000 miles on it now, so no harm, no foul. But anyway, the aluminum and some other things were a little bit high on this fluid, as we discovered. Now, we also had some testing done on some used sample of the AMSOIL, what was it, the ATF that they had, and did that in 2017. Had about 39,000 miles or so on it, and the cost of this fluid is, wow, $15.50 a quart. Don't know if it, if you buy a membership or whatever, I guess you can get it a lot cheaper, but holy cow, that's some expensive stuff, folks. As it says, no evidence of damage, even though we had the heat that I was concerned about. But basically, it's a decent transmission fluid that did the job. Now we got the Mercon LV Maxlife, Valvoline Maxlife, and I did that testing of 2018, which was just last year. Ran at about 35,000 miles, and this stuff runs at $17.97 a gallon at the old what do you call Walmart. That's right, you can get that stuff right there. So definitely far less money spent on transmission fluid going to Wally World and buying the Valvoline. Basically, I did the testing on there, and they said the tan showed some mild acidity at 3.9. This is the only fluid I tested for the tan, and basically what they're saying is I could have gone about another 10,000 miles on it without issue. Now we move into the testing. We did basically, I had two of the changes were done through a machine, so I'm going to cover those real quick. Is that the Coastal was changed out with a fluid exchange machine, the AMSOIL was changed out with a fluid exchange machine, and then I did a 4 times drain and fill for the Valvoline Maxlife. So two common things and then another common thing going there. Probably changed out more fluid with the 4X than I did with the machine, in my own personal opinion. But as far as aluminum across the board, the Coastal had 17 parts per million of aluminum on its run, and the AMSOIL had 8 parts per million of aluminum in its test sample, and the Valvoline came in at a low 5 parts per million. So kudos go to them. There is no chromium in any of the samples. Now we come to the iron. The Coastal had 36 parts per million iron, with the AMSOIL having 22 parts per million of the iron, and the Valvoline Maxlife came in at 16 parts per million, which gives kudos again. We also had the Coastal coming in with some copper at 64 parts per million. The AMSOIL was running at 44 parts per million, with the Valvoline Maxlife at 38 parts per million. Again, kudos on that for having lower levels there. Both the Coastal and the AMSOIL had 1 part per million lead, whereas the Valvoline had 0. Tin. We had the Coastal with 2 parts per million of tin. The AMSOIL had 1 part per million of tin, and so did the Valvoline have 1 part per million of 10. Moly, okay, we had no moly in the Coastal. The AMSOIL had 2 parts per million of the moly in it, and the Maxlife had 0 parts per million. Nickel, we had 1 part per nickel for both the AMSOIL and the Coastal, with 0 parts per million for the Mercon LV Maxlife. Manganese, yes, manganese. We had some manganese in the Coastal, 3 parts per million, and the AMSOIL had 1 part per million, along with the Maxlife having 1 part per million. Silver, there's nothing in the silver content of any one of these. There's also no titanium in any of these transmission fluids. We had 2 parts per million in the Coastal, with 0 parts per million of potassium in the AMSOIL and 0 in the Valvoline. Boron, we had Coastal with 56 parts per million of boron, 151 parts per million in the AMSOIL, and 254 parts per million of the boron in the Mercon Maxlife. Picking it up over at the silicon, we had 6 parts per million in the Coastal fluid, along with AMSOIL having 5 parts per million, equal to the Valvoline Maxlife at 5 parts per million. Moving on, sodium. We had 2 parts per million sodium in the Coastal, 3 parts per million in the AMSOIL, and 5 parts per million in the Valvoline Maxlife. Moving to the calcium. Yes, we had 117 parts per million calcium in the Coastal, with 169 parts per million calcium in the AMSOIL, and then going to the Valvoline Maxlife, 219 parts per million for the Valvoline Maxlife. Magnesium, we had 3 parts per million of the magnesium in the Coastal, with 6 parts per million in the AMSOIL, and just 1 part per million magnesium in the Valvoline. 217 parts per million phosphorus was located in the Coastal, with 392 parts per million phosphorus in the AMSOIL product, and 574 parts per million phosphorus in the Valvoline Maxlife. 20 parts per million of zinc in the Coastal fluid, 14 parts per million of zinc in the AMSOIL, and just 4 parts per million in the Valvoline Maxlife, with 0 barium in any one of the tested transmission fluids. Now, SUS viscosity of the 3. We run across the Valvoline Maxlife had a 44.8, the AMSOIL had a 44.5, and the Coastal had a 48.1. So all things being said, the Maxlife and the AMSOIL pretty much tied in that endeavor. The CST viscosity was 5.65 for the Valvoline, 5.57 for the AMSOIL, and the Coastal was a 6.69. As we can see, both the AMSOIL and the Valvoline are pretty much tied in this endeavor. The Valvoline came up with a higher flash point of 245 or 425 degrees, and the AMSOIL was 415, with the Coastal coming in behind at 400 parts or 400 degrees for the flash point. There was absolutely no fuel in any of it, no antifreeze was located, no water, of course, was mentioned, and there was just a trace of insolubles in the Coastal fluid, and no traces of insolubles in the other 2 fluids. As I said, the total acid number, TAN, for the Maxlife was 3.9. I did not do a test on the AMSOIL or Coastal. Because I've been upgrading my testing, and Maxlife was the first one that I started out with. So I cannot say too much about the AMSOIL, what it would be, or the Coastal. Who knows what they'd be. But just for a reference, the Maxlife seems to have more additives, so therefore it's probably faring pretty decent. But that's apples to oranges, because we have a couple other things that we're going to be looking at. Let's see. Coastal Full Synthetic Multi-Vehicle ATF is no longer available. It's most likely a Group 2 or 3 base stock oil. Bulk ATF sold at garages and quick lube facilities is where you're going to generally find this. It was very inexpensive fluid when purchased because it's bought by bulk, and the performance was not great during the testing period. Yeah, it didn't fare out well, so it's probably why they got rid of it for the most part. But 30,000 mile fluid is what my opinion on the Coastal is. The AMSOIL, very expensive fluid, not sure what the payback is on there, but is most likely the better of the blended oils, being a synthetic. It's probably PAO ester based stock, which means that it's going to have a better, synthetic nature to it, which gives it a heads up. It's definitely going to be better in that aspect. But it is expensive because it is a synthetic Group 4 or 5. So that I'm not so sure the membership fees and everything else that go with it are going to help you out as saving money. Long term, I'm not sure if it's durable enough to say double your time. Instead of driving 60, you drive 120,000 miles, whatever the case may be. I'm just not into testing of that long term part because I go under severe driving conditions. Performance was notably good, though, I will say that, and I'm not sure if it would hold up to AMSOIL's claims. I'm just not buying it, okay? So that's just my opinion, but I would follow severe use of according to the manufacturer of your vehicle. That way you are certain that you are getting the right fluids changed. And let's see, Valvoline Maxlife Mercon LV, consumer priced. It's easily obtained through Walmart and many other places. It's probably a group 3, and based on the SDS, a little bit of an ester mixed in there, approximately 2%, I believe. Performance has been good over long-term testing, and I'm going to say 100,000 miles. You could probably get away with it under normal conditions, but again, I wouldn't go any further than 30 or whatever the severe issues are, because city driving is considered severe. So I go with the 30,000 mile change on my edge. It's all highway, but I've gone as high as 50,000 miles. So it's your choice what you want to do, but all I can say is frequency is your friend when you're changing oils, and that is definitely what you need to do. Check your transmission fluids. Drain and fills are generally the thing. Do not flush your transmission, especially if it's a Ford Edge and other vehicles. Drain and fills will do just fine on that. Change filters if they are accessible, etc., etc. But basically this is just to tell you what fluid for the price of money is going to do the job for you. And I think we all saw that the Mercon LV Maxlife is probably the best bang for the buck on this one. So this is MACTFORDEDGE. Make sure you like, join, subscribe, and all that to my Facebook group and also the YouTube channel. Mercy Girl's got a couple one-liners for you. My feet hit the floor today, so have a great day. And the Band of One has some great music.
Thank you for watching MacT's videos, and remember to like and subscribe. This is a Mercy Girl production.